Okay, so today we're going way deep into the life of Francisco Candido Xavier.
Better known as Chico Xavier, huh?
Exactly, Chico Xavier. So, this guy's story is singular, to say the least.
Definitely singular.
I mean, decades as a spirit medium and philanthropist.
Yeah.
And on top of that, he's supposed to have psychographed like hundreds of books, tons and tons of letters.
A lot of material, right.
And that's really what we want to get into in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We're not just looking at his life story, the dates and the places,
Right.
but we're really trying to get to the heart of his experiences,
Yeah.
what his claims mean,
Yeah.
what are the questions that come up, and some of them get pretty controversial.
Oh, yeah. Definitely controversial.
We want to extract like the most insightful stuff for everybody.
And thankfully, we've got a lot to work with.
Yeah.
I mean, what you've given me really lays out the whole scope of his life.
Uh-huh.
And, the big thing is psychography.
Which, just to be clear,
Yeah.
is this idea of a medium receiving and writing messages that are said to be from spirits.
That's it.
But then we also see like how people reacted to him
Oh, yeah.
publicly.
All over the map, right?
And then, some folks tried to debunk him, the whole thing.
It's a really multifaceted story.
So complicated.
And we're going to try to hit the main points.
Yeah, so let's just start at the very beginning.
Okay.
So Francisco de Paula Candido was born April 10th, 1910,
Okay.
in Pedro Leopoldo, a town in Minas Gerais, Brazil.
Humble beginnings.
Very humble.
Yeah.
His dad was a lottery ticket salesman,
And his mom.
Catholic housewife.
Pretty standard.
Yeah, and his education. I mean, he finished primary school in 1924
Okay.
and then just went straight to work as a clerk.
So really ordinary start to life.
Yeah, but then things take a very spiritual turn.
They do, and kind of early on, too.
Yeah, when he was 17, so May 1927,
Okay.
his sister Maria, she starts having mental health issues.
Oh, wow.
And within Spiritism, this is seen as obsession.
Right, so just to clarify,
Yeah.
obsession and spiritism. That's when you've got these negative spiritual influences.
Okay.
They can really mess with a person's head, even their physical health.
That's heavy.
It is, and for Chico, this was huge.
I'd bet.
He found out he could help his sister through his own mediumship.
So he's developing these abilities.
Right alongside that, he's getting into Allan Kardec.
Now, Allan Kardec, I mean, he's central to all of this, right?
Oh, absolutely. Can't talk about Chico without Kardec.
So for those who don't know, can you give us the basics?
Sure. So Kardec, actually, that was his pen name.
Oh, I didn't know that.
His real name was Hippolyte Leon Denizard Reveil.
A mouthful.
I know, but this guy, he was a French educator and researcher.
Okay.
And back in the mid-1800s, he's the one who really codified Spiritism.
What does that mean, codified?
Basically, he laid out the core ideas in a structured way.
Okay.
So Spiritism, at its heart, it says that the spirit survives after death,
Okay.
that the living and the dead can talk to each other through mediums.
Got it.
And then you've got reincarnation, this idea that we keep coming back and learning.
Okay.
It's all about moral progress.
Interesting.
And that's all laid out in Kardec's work.
And this had a huge impact on Chico.
Oh, huge.
Yeah. I mean, and it seems like right after he starts looking into Spiritism,
Yeah.
he gets this message from his dead mother.
Apparently.
Yeah. So what do we know about that?
Well, it seems like the message was all about encouraging him
Okay.
to embrace his spiritual path. Go all in
Wow.
and to really study Kardec's books.
So I guess that would feel like a big confirmation.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Especially coming so soon after his sister's experience.
Exactly. And then just a month later,
Yeah.
he and his brother start the Centro Espírita Luis Gonzaga.
So June 1927.
That becomes like his home base.
Yeah, for all his spiritual work and community stuff.
And then it's like boom, boom, boom.
Right.
A month after the center opens, he has his first psychography experience.
Like it was just waiting to
It's
happen
15
out.
pages.
That's a lot for a first time.
And all supposedly guided by this benevolent spirit.
It really does seem like his path was laid out right there.
Like someone flipped a switch.
And, at first it's all pretty small scale,
Yeah.
personal stuff.
But it establishes him as a medium.
And sets the stage for everything that comes later.
For him becoming this public figure.
Exactly.
And that really takes off in the 1930s.
It does.
We hear about all these dead poets, they start talking through him.
From 1931 onwards, they start identifying themselves.
Wow, but even before that.
Yeah.
Like in 1928, his psychographed messages are getting published.
In O Jornal in Rio.
Yeah, and even in Portugal's Almanac de Noticias.
So he's getting noticed pretty early.
But then 1931 comes along.
And that's when things really explode.
Parnaso de Alem Túmulo.
Parnassus from Beyond the Grave.
Catchy title.
It is. And this book is 259 poems,
Wow.
from 56 different Brazilian and Portuguese poets,
Dead.
all dead. The
Yeah.
whole thing just shook up the Brazilian literary scene.
I bet.
You've got this clash between reason and spiritual belief.
Uh-huh.
And when someone claims they're talking to the dead, it's going to cause a stir.
Big time.
Yeah, and you have to think about it.
Yeah.
This guy, Chico, he's got limited schooling. He's a warehouse clerk.
Right.
And suddenly he's writing poetry in all these different styles.
From respected poets.
Exactly. People were blown away.
I mean, I can imagine the reactions.
Oh, yeah. Some people were like, this is amazing, real talent. But then others were like, no way, this is a fake.
Straight up imitation.
Or even worse, intentional deception.
It's like, how could this guy do this?
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting.
It's not just the poems themselves.
Right.
It's the mystery of where they came from.
Yeah. Could someone with his background really do this?
Huge question.
And then right in the middle of all this,
1931.
he meets his spiritual mentor, Emmanuel.
So tell me about Emmanuel.
Well, the sources we have, they give Emmanuel a whole backstory.
Okay.
Past lives, you know.
What kind of past lives?
Like a Roman senator, Publius Lentulus.
Wow.
Then Father Damien in Spain.
Okay.
And later a professor at the Sorbonne.
It's like a historical epic.
Right.
But why all these specific past lives?
Well, it seems like it was about giving Emmanuel authority,
Okay.
making him seem wise, you know.
Got it.
Like he'd had this long spiritual journey and really understood people.
So it would lend weight to his guidance.
Exactly.
And what was that guidance?
Well, first off, Emmanuel lays down the law.
Oh, yeah.
Discipline.
So 3 times for emphasis.
Exactly. And he tells Chico, you got to be loyal to Jesus
Okay.
and stick with Kardec's teachings.
So Emmanuel is like the guiding force.
Oh, absolutely. Shaping Chico's whole life and work.
And this focus on discipline,
Yeah.
it probably explains why Chico was so productive.
I think so. And how he stayed dedicated to his spiritual and charitable work.
For decades.
For decades.
Okay, so then we get to 1932.
Okay.
Parnaso de Alem Tumulo, officially published
Big moment.
by the epic.
The Brazilian Spiritist Federation.
And this is where Chico's commitment to charity becomes really clear.
How so?
He donates all the copyrights of his books to the FEB.
That's huge.
Yeah, I mean, he's not in it for the money or the fame.
Clearly not.
Throughout the 1930s, he's still working as a clerk typist.
But also heavily involved with the Centro Espírita Luis Gonzaga.
Right, helping people and making those psychographic books available.
It's all about service for him.
Yeah, and there's this great story about his manager, Romulo Joviano.
Oh, yeah.
This guy not only gives Chico a job,
Yeah.
but he actually supports his psychography.
Wow.
Yeah, he even lets Chico work in his basement, so he has a quiet space.
That's amazing.
It is, and that's where Chico wrote Paulo y Estevam, Paul and Stephen.
One of his big books.
Yeah, so Joviano was crucial.
Totally shows how important those human connections are.
And it suggests that the people around Chico, they believed in him.
At least they accepted what he was doing.
But of course, this is a public life.
And a very unusual one.
Yeah, so there are going to be challenges.
For sure.
The sources talk about constant criticism, people trying to discredit Chico.
I mean, it's inevitable, right?
Yeah, and Chico himself, he said he experienced spiritual attacks and temptations.
Like he's under fire from all sides.
From both worlds.
Exactly.
And then in 1930, there's this lawsuit.
Oh, yeah, a big one.
It's brought by the widow of the author Humberto de Campos.
She's going after the copyright of Brazil, Coração do Mundo, Pátria do Evangelho.
Which is Brazil, Heart of the World, Homeland of the Gospel.
Long title.
But this book was psychographed by Chico.
And she's saying, no way.
Right, she's saying my husband wrote that.
It's a big challenge to Chico's claims.
It's like his abilities are on trial.
In a legal sense, yes.
So what happened?
The FEB, they really stepped up to defend Chico.
Okay.
And the court, they came to a really interesting decision.
What was it?
They said copyright belongs to authors while they're alive.
Okay.
And legally, they couldn't prove or disprove mediumship.
Right.
So they went with the existing law.
Makes sense.
But to avoid more copyright issues, they started using a pseudonym.
For the spirit author.
Yeah, Irmán X, which means Brother X.
So they found a workaround.
They did. And it's interesting, you know,
Right.
despite all the controversy, Chico had a regular job.
Yeah, he was in the federal public service.
And a clean record, too.
So he's living this normal life.
Alongside these extraordinary claims.
It's quite a balancing act.
It is, but the controversies didn't stop.
Oh, no.
In 1958, there was this whole thing with his nephew, Amari Pena.
Yeah, what was that all about?
Well, at first Pena said he was a fraud
Okay.
and that Chico was in on it.
Wow.
But then he took it all back.
He recanted.
Yeah, and ended up in the hospital.
That must have been so tough for Chico.
Oh, yeah, a very public and painful time.
But through it all, his fame just kept growing.
It did. And in 1943, No Solar comes out.
Our Home.
Right, and this book was massive.
Huge success.
One of the most popular spiritist books in Brazil,
And it got turned into a film.
which brought it to even more people.
So what was it about Nosso Lar that caught on like that?
I think it gave people a really detailed and engaging vision of the afterlife,
Okay.
within the spiritist framework, of course.
Right.
And it really resonated with readers.
And Pedro Leopoldo became a pilgrimage site
Oh, yeah, people flocked there to connect with Chico.
to find healing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And there's this really touching story about Chico's former employer, Jose Felizardo.
Oh, yeah. What about him?
Well, he'd fallen on hard times.
Okay.
And when he died, Chico made sure he had a proper funeral.
That's so kind.
It really shows Chico's character.
His compassion and humility.
Yeah, even as he becomes famous, he doesn't forget the people who were there for him.
That's a good quality.
But that fame also brought more attention, more scrutiny.
The price of fame.
In 1944, O Cruzeiro magazine sends this journalist, David Nasser, and a photographer, Jean Manzon.
To investigate Chico.
Yeah, it was a big media event.
And the coverage wasn't exactly positive, from what I hear.
Yeah, well, there are different versions of what happened.
Like what?
Some say the journalists used fake names.
To trick Chico.
Yeah, they wanted to expose him as a fraud.
But then there's this other story.
Okay.
Years later, in 1980, David Nasser tells about getting a book from Chico
Okay.
with a personalized inscription.
Interesting.
And Nasser believed it was a message from Emmanuel.
Wow, so even this skeptical journalist,
Yeah.
he had this personal experience with Chico.
And it stuck with him, clearly.
It just shows you how complex this whole thing is.
It does personal experiences versus public perception.
It's hard to separate them.
Definitely.
Okay, so moving on a bit later in Chico's life,
Okay.
he teams up with Waldo Vieira.
The young medical student who was also a medium.
Right, they psychograph several books together.
Quite a productive partnership.
Yeah, they added to Chico's already huge output.
And expanded the range of topics they were writing about,
And then in 1959, Chico moves to Uberaba.
which becomes the new pilgrimage center.
Right.
And in the 1960s, his psychography starts tackling these contemporary issues, like sex, drugs, youth culture,
Wow.
technology, space travel.
So he's keeping up with the times.
He is.
Yeah, and during this period, those message books become really popular.
Oh, yeah, the ones with letters from dead people to their families.
Right, giving comfort and connection.
Exactly.
But Chico's charity work, that never stops.
Food, clothing, always helping those in need.
And in 1965, he goes to the United States
With Waldo Vieira
to promote Spiritism.
taking it to a wider audience.
And then back in Brazil in the early 70s,
Yeah,
he goes on this super popular TV show, Pinga Fogo.
millions of people watching.
Right, he's in everyone's living room.
Huge exposure.
And in one of those interviews, this journalist, Schran de Scantenbergo,
Is pretty skeptical.
yeah, he grills Chico about the authenticity of the psychography.
I mean, how could Chico, with his limited education,
Right.
right, like all these different authors,
Exactly.
Santenbergo even suggests maybe it's all coming from Chico's subconscious.
Wow. So how does Chico handle this?
He's very humble, very polite.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
He keeps saying he's just a channel.
For the spirits.
Yeah, they dictate. He writes it down.
But he does acknowledge that his own thoughts could play a role.
But ultimately, he credits the style and content to Emmanuel and the other spirits.
Interesting. And they even talk about Catholic saints.
Yeah, the idea that some of them might have been mediums too,
Wow.
just in a different context.
Okay, so as we get into the 80s and 90s,
Yeah,
Chico's fame goes international.
his books are getting translated all over the place.
And some even get adapted into telenovelas.
Huge audience for those.
And by the late 90s, he's published over 400 books.
That's incredible.
It's estimated there were 50 million Spiritist books in Brazil at that time.
With a lot of them being Chico's.
But even with all the success,
Yeah.
the controversies don't go away.
No, they don't.
There's this article in the National Examiner in 1994.
That tabloid.
Yeah, they called Chico a millionaire ghostwriter.
Like, he's getting rich off the spirits.
Right, and then Manchete magazine picks up the story in Brazil. They even claim that Chico admitted the books came from literal ghosts.
So what happens?
Well, Chico himself doesn't really respond.
But the FEB, they issue a statement.
Right, there's his main publisher.
Exactly. They clarify that all the copyrights and royalties,
Yeah.
they've always gone to charity.
From the very beginning.
It was all about making the books accessible and spreading Spiritist ideas.
Not about personal profit.
Exactly. And the Brazilian Spiritist organizations, they really backed Chico up.
Yeah, the FEB, they even issue a formal vote of appreciation.
They recognize his decades of service and dedication.
To both the movement and to charitable causes.
Absolute.
Okay, so now we're getting to the end of Chico's life.
Okay.
He passes away on June 30, 2002.
At 92.
And there's this really interesting detail about his death.
What's that?
Well, he'd said he wanted to die on a day of national joy.
To lessen the sadness.
Exactly. And incredibly, he dies on the day Brazil wins the FIFA World Cup.
Wow, that's quite a coincidence.
Or maybe something more.
Given his beliefs.
Right. And then in 2010, they make a film about him,
Chico Xavier
which was very popular in Brazil.
brought his story to a whole new audience.
But even after his death, the scrutiny continues.
There are still people who say he was a fraud.
Yeah, and there's Waldo Vieira's earlier claims.
And Chico's association with some mediums who were later exposed as fakes.
It's all part of the ongoing debate.
But you have to also look at the counter-arguments.
Right.
And the studies that have been done to check the accuracy of the information in his letters and books.
It's complicated.
Very complicated.
But in terms of recognition, Chico was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1981.
Which got a lot of support.
And he received a lot of awards in Brazil.
The Comenda da Paz, Chico Xavier.
He was voted Mineiro of the 20th century.
And even the greatest Brazilian of all time.
Wow.
He clearly holds a special place in Brazilian culture.
Yeah, I mean, his homes and workplaces have become memorials and museums.
A section of the BR-050 highway is named after him.
His centenary was huge.
And they're still building a memorial in Uberaba.
They unveiled a bronze statue of him there in 2020.
He's even in the Livro dos Heróis e Heroínas da Pátria, the book of heroes and heroines of the fatherland.
It's amazing when you think about it.
Oh.
Over 450 books, thousands of letters.
And he always said he wasn't the author.
All the money went to charity.
It's a unique case.
The topics he covered, the reach he had.
And those letters.
People say they're full of accurate personal details.
Some were even used in court cases.
But there are also those scientific studies.
Looking at his brain activity during the trances.
And different opinions on how accurate the information really is.
It's all part of the mystery.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I think it's clear that Chico Xavier's life is a fascinating study in faith and dedication.
He was devoted to his mission.
And he had a huge impact on millions of people.
Through his charity and his messages.
But the thing that really stays with me
What's that?
is the sheer amount he wrote.
450 books?
And all those different topics.
And the way those letters touched people.
It makes you wonder about consciousness.
About creativity, about belief.
Big questions.
Yeah.
There was skepticism, there were accusations of fraud.
But his popularity was undeniable.
And the faith he inspired in so many.
That's a powerful legacy.
It really makes you think,
About what?
what does it mean for one person to become such a huge figure?
To channel so many voices.
To dedicate their life to such an extraordinary mission.
It's something to ponder.
For all of us.
Definitely a lot to think about after this deep dive.
Absolutely.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.